Welcome. This may be a slightly shorter episode this week, as I am limited with time in this recording session. But there's no rushing needed. That's one of the things I've noticed this week of the practice of being slow. Noticing the energy of trying to rush doing something. Understanding the stressful charge that's occurring in the body and in the mind. And quite often, when you are rushing, sometimes it can take just as long as if you were going slightly slower. It's funny how it works. The body and the mind is more limber when you are not in a state of stress, and when you are rushing you may make mistakes and have to redo them, and it can take longer. But the practice of being slow coincides with being spacious as well. That no moment is overlooked. That the next moment is not more important than this moment. Even if you are wiping down the kitchen counter, it's done with the same alertness, the same awareness as if you were doing something that the mind would label more important. If you are on an important phone call with someone you care about, you're putting in that same awareness, that same consideration. And in doing so, there's that same stillness and spaciousness opening up for you. And once you've experienced that, then you can see that there's a choice. This can be done in suffering, in stressful thoughts of the thoughts, I've got to do this, and then I've got to do this afterwards, and then I've got to do all of these other things. All of those thoughts are held there as you're doing the activity. They're weighing on the mind. It's almost you've lifted a weight and you're holding that weight as well as doing the activity you're doing. And only in a direct experience you can see, you can feel, and you can understand the suffering, and even on a subtle level as well. The more this practice embeds, the more we deepen, the more the various layers of suffering we see. Not just a suffering of something we can label as big, as, if we've just gone into a big depressive mood. Maybe someone has passed away, or there's been some big event in their life where it's clear there's suffering there. But even just with a very subtle thought, you can sense, there's a bit of suffering here. In a very, there may be a small thought of, I should have done this. And ordinarily we wouldn't notice the effects of these thoughts because we're so used to them. They're such a habit. But the more we become awake and alive to these thoughts, we're almost tasting the thoughts. We're not just allowing them to pass through, to take effect on our body and then go. It's almost like a gatekeeper. One of the previous books by Thich Nhat Hanh, he used the example of being almost, at the gates of a castle, and being aware of every face that enters. So in this instance, being aware of every thought that arises. It's not about just unconsciously allowing thoughts to pass through and almost wreak havoc and suffering, and then trying to remedy that afterwards. It's in the same process. When you are in that peaceful state, there's that oneness in thoughts and feelings and emotions and presence. Everything arises in that space. There is only the covering up of this awareness. So it's always there, always accessible, but thoughts and the mind cover it up, and then thoughts flood in, emotions, and before you know it, you're having a very bad day. Or you've just woken up and already the day is terrible. Already you've had, a big surfing of thoughts that you didn't ask for. And this is not about controlling the thoughts. You may wake up and very well, there may be, very negative, dark thoughts about the day. But you won't be adding to them. You won't be dialing into each of these thoughts and letting them pervade your body and mind even further. Let them grow and create emotions in the body. Instead, there'll just be an acknowledgement of, okay, you can sense the thoughts there, the dense energy perhaps. And in that moment, maybe some action is required. Perhaps maybe you think to yourself, okay, let's go for a walk. Let's journal about these thoughts, or journal in awareness about what I'm feeling, or maybe it's time to do some yoga. But you haven't allowed the thoughts to take over you, where they've taken effect and you're already in that low place. We talked about, we touched upon depression on the last episode. So, as someone myself going through that, experienced that for a number of years, there's almost this habit now to address low moods as they come, or even now I still get taken over, and I'm saying all of these practices, but I myself struggle just as much as you may do as well. So just wanted to touch upon that before diving into a new earth. And I did say this would be a short episode, but I'm already coming up to approaching 10 minutes and I haven't started reading. So we're still in the early stages of a new earth, where Eckhart is almost laying the foundation. He was giving the big picture of things, just so as he goes into more detail later in the book, then there's almost a frame of reference there. So it makes sense when things on a smaller scale or more detailed would be understood in that frame of reference. So this section is called Spirituality and Religion. What is the role of the established religions in the arising of the new consciousness? Many people are already aware of the difference between spirituality and religion. They realize that having a belief system, a set of thoughts that you regard as the absolute truth, does not make you spiritual, no matter what the nature of those beliefs is. In fact, the more you make your thoughts, beliefs into your identity, the more cut off you are from the spiritual dimension within yourself. Many religions, people are stuck at that level. They equate truth with thought, and as they are completely identified with thought, their mind, they claim to be in sole possession of the truth in an unconscious attempt to protect their identity. They don't realize the limitations of thought. Unless you believe, think exactly as they do, you are wrong in their eyes. And in the not too distant past, they would have felt justified in killing you for that. And some still do, even now. The new spirituality, the transformation of consciousness, is arising to a large extent outside of the structures of the existing institutionalized religions. There are always pockets of spirituality, even in mind-dominated religions. Although the institutionalized hierarchies felt threatened by them and often tried to suppress them, a large-scale opening of spirituality outside of the religious structures is an entirely new development. In the past, this would have been inconceivable, especially in the West, the most mind-dominated of all cultures, where the Christian Church had a virtual franchise on spirituality. You couldn't just stand up and give a spiritual talk or publish a spiritual book unless you were sanctioned by the church. And if you were not, they would quickly silence you. But now, even within certain churches and religions, there are signs of change. It is heartwarming, and one is grateful for even the slightest signs of openness, such as Pope John Paul II visiting a mosque as well as a synagogue. Partly as a result of the spiritual teachings that have arisen outside the established religions, but also due to an influx of the ancient Eastern wisdom teachings, a growing number of followers of traditional religions are able to let go of identification with form, dogma, and rigid belief systems, and discover the original depth that is hidden within their own spiritual tradition, at the same time as they discover the depths within themselves. They realize that how spiritual you are has nothing to do with what you believe, but everything to do with your state of consciousness. this, in turn, determines how you act in the world and interact with others. Those unable to look beyond form become even more deeply entrenched in their beliefs, that is to say, in their mind. We are witnessing not only an unprecedented influx of consciousness at this time, but also an entrenchment and intensification of the ego. Some religious institutions will be open to the new consciousness. Others will harden their doctrinal positions and become part of all those other man-made structures through which the collective ego will defend itself and fight back. Some churches, sects, cults, or religious movements are basically collective egoic entities, as rigidly identified with their mental positions as the followers of any political ideology that is closed to any alternative interpretation of reality. But the ego is destined to dissolve, and all is ossified structures, whether they be religious or other institutions, corporations or governments, they will disintegrate from within, no matter how deeply entrenched they appear to be. The most rigid structures, the most impervious to change, will collapse first. This has already happened in the case of Soviet communism. How deeply entrenched, how solid and monolithic it appeared, and yet within a few years it disintegrated from within. No one foresaw this. All were taken by surprise. There are many more such surprises in store for us. Okay, so that's the end of that section, and I'm coming to the end of my time of this recording. So again, Eckhart is just simply in broad strokes commenting on observations of the rigidity of certain cults or sects or certain religious entities that are identified with ego, where the true essence has not been understood. So just a few moments of spaciousness, a few slow moments there. Remember, there is a choice between rushing and taking your time. And taking your time doesn't even have to be slow. Eckhart mentioned in The Power of Now, you can, I think if I'm probably paraphrasing what he said, but you can hurry slowly. So even though you may have to move quickly, but in your awareness you are still. He used the example of running for a bus there, where you're hurrying slowly, maybe running and waving your hand to get the driver's attention to stop, but in your depth there is not a panic there. There is no rigidity and there's no, if you to look at the body, there's no tension. you're very aware of the hurrying that's required in this moment, but it's not a thought, a stressful thought of, I, I'm here, but I need to get there, and this here is not good enough. I should be there. But apologies for the interruption. I just received a phone call, so I'm not sure how that passed through, but yeah. So that's the end of this week's episode. I hope to record. Maybe a slight gap, as I may not have the opportunity to record for this week, but I will have that in my awareness to record when the time arises. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.